Singing Dutchman Productions.
Hi, this is Christina
and Jürgen Heilig
in Buchen, Germany.
And you're listening to Doug's Front Porch.
Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends old and new and have honest conversations. Today I welcome to the front porch someone I would consider a newer friend or acquaintance, and that's Charles Fergus. Charles, thanks so much for coming on Doug's Front Porch.
Well, it's really great to sit here on your front porch and rock with you a little bit, Doug.
I wish we were physically sitting on my front porch today. It's a beautiful day here in central Pennsylvania, 70 degrees, sun was shining. It was really felt like spring was knocking at the door. It would have been really nice to physically have this conversation, but we're going to have to rely on digital communications and allow the internet to be our virtual front porch today.
I can handle that.
Sounds good. Well, I think let's start. I usually start all my episodes the same way, Charles, and that's kind of tell our audience a little bit about your background. So tell us a little bit about where you're from, maybe a little bit about, did you grow up with brothers or sisters? And then you can also go into, did you go to college or, what happened after school was over? And then we'll take the conversation farther down the road here in a little bit.
Well, gee, Doug, considering how ancient I am, this could go on for a little while, but I'll give it a whirl anyway. I was born and raised in Center County, Pennsylvania. I was born in the Bellefonte Hospital back when there was a hospital in Bellefonte, and I went through the state college school system. My dad was a professor of botany and plant pathology at Penn State, and my mom was an editor. And I have lots of good memories of growing up in State College in the 1950s and 1960s. Since my dad was on the faculty at Penn State, I went ahead and enrolled at Penn State and got my undergraduate education there. I actually started off in landscape architecture, but I flunked engineering graphics, so I decided writing was a better bet. So that's what I did, and I was very fortunate in that I got a job directly out of college with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, Pennsylvania's Wildlife Commission in Harrisburg, and I was with them for about 3 years, and then I went to work for Penn State. A job opened up there on a magazine about research. So I've really been in writing all my career. And I've always loved to write and to read. So it's been a really rewarding career. I worked for Penn State for some time, and then I went freelance. And I've had, 20 books published over the years. A lot of them have been about nature and the outdoors. I had a novel that came out in 1995, a historical novel called Shadow Catcher, which was about early candid photography and I attached it to a real life expedition that went around the American West visiting Native American reservations. And it was quite an event. And then most recently, I have been enjoying writing mysteries. And these mysteries are set in central Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised, and of course they're set in the 1830s, and that even predates me.
Yeah. Well, we're going to definitely come back to that a little later in the interview, but I was curious, as a child, were you the kind of kid that would sit and just write, or was that something that you kind of developed as you were, maybe in college or high school? Some kids just love to read and write even when they're young. I'm finding that with my own 2 young children. My daughter will just go in her room and start writing these poems or stories. And then I also, as a teacher, I see kids that absolutely hate writing and reading. So given what it sounds like your childhood was like with parents that were involved in academia and in what they did, was that something that as a young child you were already, you were constantly writing things, or was it different?
I don't recall doing a whole lot of writing. I remember that I had a pen pal uh, named Joe, and I would write letters to him, and then I would put them in an envelope, and his address was way out west, and so I would put a stamp on it. And my mother would tolerate that, and I would mail these letters to Joe way out west. But that's the only thing I can recall writing back when I was a really young kid. Um, I think in high school I discovered that I had an ability to write. And then when I went to Penn State, I was very fortunate because Penn State had just started a program called the writing option. And so I could major in English and then take writing. And this program was it recognized that it was in order for you to become employed as a writer, um, it would be helpful if you had an area of specialization. And so I chose as my area science. And what that was essentially a minor in science. So I took English courses, most of them writing, and a range of different kinds of writing courses, technical writing, poetry, um, article writing, fiction writing, uh, under I guess the strategy or the philosophy that all kinds of writing, engaging in all kinds of writing will make you a better writer. And so I also then had this area of specialization in science. And so when I graduated, I was, like I said, fortunate that um, the Game Commission was looking for a staff writer for Pennsylvania Game News magazine. And I still actually write for them. I share a back page column with three other writers. And so essentially, I've written for the Game News all my life. And that's that neat little magazine that's just the right size to fit on the back of the toilet. So,
I have to, I have to, I have to share one story about that. So, I've known you a lot longer than what you think I've known you, based on that connection right there. My grandfather, was, as long as I can remember, from a young child on, always had a subscription to the Pennsylvania Game News. He was an avid outdoorsman, hunter, fisherman, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up. All four of my grandparents, I was very lucky. But my paternal grandparents, the grandfather I'm talking about right now, whenever I would go to their house, which was often, they had in their living room, they had two chairs by the big bay window, and there was a coffee table, and on that coffee table, religiously, was a copy of the Pennsylvania Game News, the newest edition. And my grandmother would never take it away from the coffee table until the next edition came. And Sundays after church, if we were there for lunch, or Saturday nights, I would often pick that publication up and page through it. I'd read it. So I mean, I possibly was reading your work when I was a little kid, or as a teenager, not knowing now that I would eventually get to meet you and have this conversation today. But we share that connection. It was a great, my grandfather was a farmer most of his life, and he wasn't an avid reader. He didn't read books and novels. He read the newspaper every morning, but he always also read his second go-to publication, other than the Reading Eagle, our local newspaper, was the Pennsylvania Game News. So I have that connection with you, and you talking about that magazine brings back a lot of fond memories of time at my grandparents' house growing up, for sure.
Yeah, it is a very popular magazine. I know, and I don't know what their current subscription figures are, but at one point they had close to 1 million subscribers, if you can believe it.
Wow, that's
And
crazy.
I know that, for instance, Amish families often subscribe because it's a magazine that is, reliably going to be, I don't want to say it, not controversial and not,
Yeah.
containing, I guess, sort of negative material.
Yeah. Yeah. So you spent some time writing for things like the Pennsylvania Game News, and you mentioned other science-based writing. Uh, uh, what is that process like? Because I want to talk about what your process is like writing fiction and mystery a little later. But right now, if you're, sitting down and you're going to write an article about, I don't know, salamanders or birds or a specific species of birds. What is that process like to put out something that you know you're going to be writing to a reader that is not an expert on salamanders or birds, but yet you want to get your story, you know, you want to get this information across to them in an easily digestible fashion, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the beauty of writing well, and that is communicating. And it's so I think you need to have respect for your audience, and I don't think you should write down to your audience. I think you should um, report on the facts or the interesting aspects that have intrigued you, and have faith that they will also be of interest to your reader. Um, Nonfiction, there are different kinds of nonfiction, of course. I mean, for instance, I wrote a book called Trees of Pennsylvania, and each chapter is about a different kind of a tree. A red oak, let's say. So I would do research into a red oak, and I'd think about experiences that I've had having to do with red oaks. And that was a different kind of writing than I might have used to write something that was shorter and more information driven or fact driven. Those are sort of like comparing an essay or a memoir with uh, a piece of technical writing, if you will. But I think that there are a lot of shared techniques, uh, different you know different types of writing. Um, you kind of work in similar ways, even though there are different genres of writing. You have to pick your facts. You have to decide, okay, which facts or which observations or which you know uh, reports on different senses that you've used to experience your subject. Which of those is going to create the most understandable picture for your reader? And I think that is shared in both fiction writing, between both fiction writing and nonfiction writing, certain kinds of nonfiction writing, because in both instances you really have a universe of facts. You've got an infinitude of facts, and you pick out certain of those facts and you present them. And the way you present them and the specific facts that you use end up creating the picture that you want to paint for your reader.
Well, it's a great transition. Let's shift now to a little bit about. Well, let's tell it. I mean, we're into this interview now, and we never really told the audience how we know each other. So Charles already had alluded to the fact that he's now writing or is writing mystery novels, and we're going to definitely highlight two that he is that are current out there in publication. What made you, before we tell people how we know each other, what made you decide I'm going to shift from writing about red oaks, for example, and the trees of Pennsylvania, to I want to write a mystery novel? Because I mean, that's a total, for me, thinking from the outside, not being a professional writer, that's a huge mind shift for me. Is that the case? And what made you make that decision? I want to go in this direction now for a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, a great question. It was kind of, I almost did the first mystery, which is titled A Stranger Here Below. I almost did that on a lark. I wanted to see, can I write a mystery? I liked reading mysteries, and I like reading thrillers. I think they're very tend to be well paced, and stories that keep you turning pages, and absorb your attention, and paint a good picture of what life may have been like for in a different society or at a different time, a different place. So I kind of wanted to see if I could write a mystery. And I had my wife had brought my wife, she's a writer too. Nancy Marie Brown is her name, but she had found a little book at the uh, annual book sale at Penn State that's sponsored by the AAUW, the American
Yep.
Association of University Women. And that book was called From the Danish Peninsula by a writer named Steensen Blicher. And he was a minister in northern Denmark, and he lived from 1782 to 1848. And that book that he wrote included a tale called The Parson at Vileby, and that narrative inspired the interior story of A Stranger Here Below, kind of the plot within the plot that was related in a journal that my main character was reading and trying to figure out why his very good friend and mentor had taken his own life. Um, so I wrote that first mystery, and it didn't go so great. It was hard. And
Well, let's talk about that, because I mean, a lot of listeners that I have, I know, to this podcast are avid readers, but I doubt that few of them are going to pick up a pen and start to write a novel. So what gave you difficulties while writing this mystery?
well, I don't think the setting gave me too much difficulty because I set it in central Pennsylvania in the 1830s. Of course, I had to imagine and do research to figure out what that part of the world might have been like. I mean, I know the terrain very well because I was born and raised there, and I know the lay of the land. But there were different trees on the landscape at the time, and many fewer people, obviously.
Yeah.
So I think I was able to imagine those things pretty well. Um, but I don't know. I had a hard time developing my character and really feeling uh, that I had this young Pennsylvania German. I had him right. And I so I remember at one point I gave a copy of the manuscript to a friend of mine, and she was a writer and also a teacher, and she read it, and she said to me, you should put some of your own backstory into this character, and it would really make this character a lot more intriguing and interesting to readers. And so this is going to be weird. It's going to sound weird, but I have to, I will tell you honestly that um, there was a murder in my family, and when I was in my 40s, this happened. My mother was murdered, and so I have this understanding, I guess you could say, of what murder is really like. And this friend of mine who had read my manuscript, she made a very bold, I would say, suggestion, and that was to write to give your main character a history or a backstory of having lost his mother to a murder. And so I really basically rewrote the whole book, giving my main character Gideon Stoltz uh, this history that he brings with him into Centre County. He grew up in Lancaster County, and when he got into his early 20s, he decided he didn't want to be a farmer, and so he left southeastern Pennsylvania and he rode into what was then very wild terrain in the central part of the state. Really, it had only been settled for about 50 years, if that. Um, so anyway, that seemed to I became involved with this character. I came to like this character a great deal. And then when this mystery was taken by a publisher, of course, they wanted a sequel. And so that's how I wrote the second novel, Nighthawk's Wing. And I'm at work on a third one right now.
What, just out of curiosity, okay, so you're working on this novel. What is your process like? I have two questions that I've been thinking about today. When you sat down to start physically writing the book, did you already know the ending? Like, had you worked out the whole storyline in your mind or on paper or whatever, and then you sat down and started writing, or was it different than that?
Well, actually, because I did not really know quite how to write a mystery for the first book, that was different than the way I approached the second book.
Okay.
The first, I will say though that I did have a sense of the ending at the very before I even began to write for both books. Um, and the first book, I kind of blundered my way through. It was I was uh, I was learning how to write a mystery. And then I, um, for the second book, after the first book was published, um, when I said, okay, I know I'm going to write a second book now, and I thought, well, I've got to be a little more scientific about this. I have to be a little more strategic. And I wrote, I found a book called How to Write a Damn Good Mystery. And I thought, I can learn something from this guy, and I could. And he was kind of like the old school, 1950s, sit down at the desk with your tie on and your cigarette in the corner of your mouth and bang out a novel. But he really had some great ideas. And the one idea or the one suggestion that he made, or strategy that he advocated, was look at all of your characters and write each character's history from their own point of view. So you really get to know your character. So, the villain in a mystery is a critically important character. So you sit down and you write out, where was this villain born? What was it like, for him when he was growing up? What did he value? Did he value money? Did he value, love? Did he value prestige or honor? What was it? What drives this character? And you do that for each of your major characters. And so when you get to really know each character, what makes them click, what their past is, what their hopes are for the future. And then when you put those characters together in scenes, you have a good sense of how they are going to interact with each other. So I did that with Nighthawk's Wing, and I found it to be a really effective way to write a mystery.
What did it make the process maybe a little bit more efficient than the first time around? Did you
Yeah,
find
yeah,
that to be the case?
you could say that, Doug.
And just out of curiosity, so when you were working on either one of these books, what's your personal process like? Do you get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, and then sit down and write? Or do you like the spirit move you and then you're like, oh, I got an idea, I'm gonna go write now? Or what's that process like for someone that is a professional writer? You don't have that 8 to 5 punch the clock, go into the office, go out of the office. What's your writing process like in that sense?
It's similar to what you just described. I get up and I have a big cup of coffee, and of course I indulge myself in online news for a while. Fortunately, that's a little less obsessive for me these days than it was a while ago. Um, and then I write. And what I will often do is I will often edit the last 3 or 4 pages that I wrote. And that kind of pulls me into the next scene that I haven't yet written. And I write differently from a lot of people. I know I have a friend, she writes young adult novels, and they're very good novels. And she just sits down and she writes it all the way through. And she writes something like, 5 pages a day. And so she's got you know, uh, a novel written in a month and a half, let's say. Whereas I tend to work more in fits and starts. I often will stop and go back, 3 or 4 chapters and look at a scene that I was thinking about. And actually, for instance, recently, this past week, I went to bed and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was full of, I guess you could call it angst, because I realized I had made a logical mistake in the behavior of one of my characters. And I realized I have to go back and change that. And changing that, thing that this particular character has done, to making it so that he hasn't done it, then that really ramified throughout the book. And I had to then remember, okay, there's another scene a little later on that proceeds from him having done this out of character thing. So I had to go back and change that. But so I guess that, to me, that was important, because I didn't want to get to the end and have to do a whole lot more changing. So that's what I mean by writing in fits and starts.
Yeah.
And sometimes, sometimes something will just come to me, or I'll read something, or I'll hear something on the radio, and I'll realize, oh wow, I really should add that to this, to a certain scene. So I will go back and do that. But yes, in general, I sit down in the morning, I have a good cup of coffee, and then I start to work. And I usually work until about noon, and then that's when I generally stop for a while. I go and I take a long walk with my wife and with our dog, and then I will often come back and work for another hour or two in the afternoon. And then at about 4 p.m., spring, summer, and fall, we go out and get on horses and take a ride.
Hmm. That sounds like a pretty good day for me.
I can't complain.
I wouldn't. Yeah, right. I have to ask this question just because I'm sure you've experienced. How do you battle writer's block? Or doesn't that seem to be an issue for you? I mean, not everybody gets it, but
No, I don't think it's an issue for me, because there's always something you can do to improve the story, to improve the profluence of the story. Um, and so what else? If I'm having a hard time with the scene, okay, then I'll go back farther in and I'll just at random pick out a scene. I'll just call up a chapter on my word processor on my computer, and I'll look at that chapter and I'll work closely on that chapter. And I have this I guess you could say simile uh, about what writing is like in my mind, and it's like building with stone. And I built a stone house, for instance, when I lived in Center County, and a book is like a stone house, and a chapter, let's say, is like 4 square feet of stone wall. So all these parts fit together, and they overlap in important ways, so that the whole structure doesn't go tumbling down. So if I'm having a little bit of trouble forging ahead, I might go back and I might spend a morning working on a chapter that I wrote 2 months ago.
okay. Well, that's great. I was hoping you wouldn't say like I just sit there and look at the screen until something happens. It's then some people experience that differently. I guess and now at some point, I guess we should say so. The books that Charles is talking about, this mystery series right now, book 2 is out in the series, but the very first one, and Charles has been talking about it. It is A Stranger Here Below, which the central character, Gideon Stoltz, is of German, Pennsylvania Dutch origin. And that's how we got to know each other when Charles, at one point, a couple years ago, I guess when he was working on the first book in the series, just blindly reached out to me and said, "Hey, I found you on the internet. You seem to know some stuff about Pennsylvania Dutch. Could we meet?" And I get a lot of kind of weird off the wall requests like that in regards to Pennsylvania Dutch stuff. Sometimes I think there's something to it. Sometimes I kind of dismiss it, but I said, absolutely, Charles, and we met for, I think we met for like beers at a local place in the Bellefonte area. And right away, as Charles was telling me this story that he's writing, as a lover of history myself, I just head over heels fell in love with the idea of getting the chance to help out what little bit I could. And in regards to some of the language aspects that the main character Gideon uses, of course, I got to give some suggestions. Let's say I can't take any credit beyond giving suggestions, but I just wanted to thank you, Charles, for reaching out and being able to include me in this process. It's been an absolute pleasure. And the first book, I will, of course, in the show notes, link to Charles's website where you can learn more about the books and read, buy your own copy, of course, of these and read them. I'm not much of a huge fiction reader, but when the first book got done and Charles sent me a copy, I burned through that book because it's set in an era of American history that I really think is overlooked first and foremost. That early part of the 1800s, we're already an established country at that point. And you're looking at the frontier, but we don't think of the frontier as, well, central Pennsylvania and the Appalachians and the Blue Ridge, but that's where it was.
No,
And
no, 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 it wasn't there then. The
but
frontier in the 1830s was Wisconsin, Iowa, Texas. But
well, let me say then the lesser developed region of Pennsylvania, maybe we could
yeah,
say that.
definitely rough and tumble, huh?
Rough and tumble. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, and the main character lives in an area that is slowly developing. And the storytelling it just sucked me in, absolutely sucked me in as a lover of history. And you really can, and I have to give you credit, Charles. You take, at least for me, you took the reader to that time period. And it wasn't just that you were telling this mystery that, of course, the story itself brought me as a reader in, but also the fact that you highlighted cultural differences as you had Scotch Irish and, and Pennsylvania Dutch colliding a little bit, these different cultures that were coming together and somehow trying to come together and form, develop our country and build our country, I guess I should say. So I just want to let the readers, yeah, well, the readers, of course, too, but the listeners, our audience, how we got to know each other. So thank you, Charles. I really appreciate you reaching out back there a couple of years ago and getting me on the line. That was fun. It was a lot of
Well,
fun.
it's been great fun for me too, Doug. And it's great. I can, if I have a question about the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect, I can send an email to Doug, and usually in like a day or two, I'll get a response, and it's perfect for me. I mean, I really appreciate it a lot. Um, but you talked about a little bit about the conflicts maybe between Scotch Irish and Pennsylvania German people, and of course, I grew up in Center County, and so those would be the two major cultural groups in Center County, even to this day. Um, and to this, to today, there's no, as far as I can tell, no real clash between these. They've really melded into one culture, if you will. Um, but in the 1830s, as I was doing research into this period, Andrew Jackson was a president, all kinds of fascinating things were happening in our country. But one of the things that I did pick up on was that in certain areas, um, there was some strife. If you had the Scotch Irish were notoriously, standoffish or clannish, I guess you might say. And, there's an old story about how they would move on if they could see the chimney smoke from a neighbor that was too close, you know? So I, you can go, for instance, over in Big Valley, you can go there and go into a cemetery, and all the names in that cemetery are McCrae or Craddock or Crandall or Crockett, and they're all Scotch Irish. And none of the people whose names are on the mailbox around there are Scotch Irish. They're all German. In many cases, they're actually Amish. But so there was, and I remember finding a reference in an old, I think it's a Center County, a book about Center County history, about how one um, farmer, his last name was Moore, I remember, Moore, which is a Scotch Irish name. And he had had a boundary dispute with his neighbor who was Pennsylvania German. And when he was close to when dying, he was on his deathbed. He said, "When I die," he said, "I want you to bury me right on the property line so the damn Dutch can't come across."
That
So,
is a great story. Oh my goodness.
but like I said, I grew up with Pennsylvania German kids. Like my college roommate was Earl Schreckengast,
Yep.
and when I went and worked for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, many of the people who worked for that agency were Pennsylvania German, and I developed a real respect for the culture. And what I found very interesting was that in many ways, the Germans who came into central Pennsylvania and points farther west were quite similar in culture to the Scotch Irish. They were a very strong, um, I guess you could say they were hunting oriented. They were warriors, in many ways. And these were not the pacifists. These were not, the Amish, the Mennonites, the Brethren. These were often German Reformed or Lutheran in background, um, and they were great hunters. They were hard workers. They had come out of Europe, been driven out of Europe by warfare, which is what happened with the Scotch Irish too. So these two cultures were not so dissimilar as you might think, and over time, each influenced the other. And even the language the accent of central Pennsylvania is a melding of these
Yeah.
two particular um, dialects, if you will.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a fascinating uh, interchange. And I think that in my books, I have heightened this a bit more than it likely was. And I mean, at the front of the book, there's some kind of a disclaimer about how what is. Let me read it to you. Um, the publishers always put this in something like, okay, this is a work of fiction. Names, places, characters, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. So, I got some leeway there. And, tension propels good fiction. And it helps you keep wanting to turn pages. There's the story going on, and there's this certain amount of menace or tension in the air, and you want to find out what happens next. What's going to happen to my main character? What's going to happen to this other person who he's interacting with? And so I would say that probably I increased the tension in the story between the two cultural groups because I thought it made for a better story.
Well, that's enough shop. Let's stop talking shop. There's one thing I found out just recently, another thing that we share in common, Charles, and that's both our love of singing. Um, let's talk just briefly about that. You said in an email, I don't know if it was today or previously this week, as we've been corresponding back and forth, that you would love to be able to have the opportunity to quickly talk about, how important singing is in your life. And as you're fully aware, singing and music is a huge part of my life and my family's life. But let's talk a little bit about how singing has influenced you, if we can.
Oh yeah, I would love to. I really miss singing because of the pandemic. Um,
Yeah.
I have really kind of had three singing outlets over the last 10 years. I live here in Vermont. I don't know if we've even said that, have we?
I don't think we have. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't live in central Pennsylvania anymore. I live in a part of Vermont called the Northeast Kingdom, and it's a pretty remote part of Vermont. We're only about 30 miles from Canada. Um, the biggest town around here is about 3 or 4 thousand people. But anyway, um, I have done some singing up here. Uh, I I began singing barbershop
Okay.
harmony, and that was really cool because it really tuned my ear. It taught me to listen so that I could harmonize with three other parts. And I was often I was in a baritone part, which is the weirdest part of all.
Yes, it
And
is.
if you in have you ever sung barbershop, Doc?
Yes, actually in college I did quite a bit, and since then I've done quite a lot of men's choral singing. I'm a bass, but there were often times where if we were weak in the baritone section or we needed somebody, then I'd get kicked to baritone, and it was I had to totally change my ear and everything because it's that is the part. It's like where all the junk goes to rest, you know.
Yeah, right.
So I
It's
know
what fills
exactly
in
what you're
the
talking about.
it fills in all those chords, and
Yeah,
without it, the chords just don't ring the same way.
right.
But it's not an instinctive part to sing. So anyway, so I started off in barbershop and enjoyed that very much. But um, different things happened, and the local barbershop chorus that I was a part of kind of dwindled. And I thought, well, I don't want to give up singing. And a friend of mine contacted me and asked me, knowing she knew that I sang, and asked me if I might want to be part of a hospice chorus. and so I said, yes, I would like to do that. And I joined uh, a group of about 20, 25 people. Um, and we have a large repertoire of probably about 150 songs, uh, a cappella, always a cappella, so no instrumental accompaniment. And we would practice uh, once a week, and then usually once a week, sometimes more, we would go and sing to folks who were in hospice care who indicated that they wanted to hear some songs. So, maybe their favorite songs were hymns. We got a lot of requests for Amazing Grace and In the Garden, the Old
Mhm.
Rugged Cross, the old standards. But then we also sing uh, songs from other cultures. And sometimes we do what are called vigil sings when a person is very close to death, and they may apparently not be, you know, cognizant of their surroundings. Their eyes are closed and they're breathing very shallowly, let's say, and very often, their family is gathered around, and we have songs that we sing that are appropriate to that setting, that are often repetitive songs, sometimes songs out of different cultures, African, for instance, just beautiful, harmony, almost angelic harmony. And they say that as you were dying, one of the last, or the last sense that you lose is your sense of hearing. And so if a person is apparently comatose, they may still be hearing things all around them. So it was a very, often a very, you had to train your emotions, because this is not about you. This is about
Yeah.
the person who was making this transition out of this world, perhaps into another world, and their family members who were gathered around them. So I missed that a great deal, because I had done it for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, I guess, and truly enjoyed uh, working with the people, the singing with learning music with these folks who I sing with, and then often, having a chance to kind of give to the community by singing to folks who desired to hear the human voice. Um, so, we've had to suspend that since just a little over a year now because of the pandemic. But we're hoping that maybe we'll be able to start doing it again.
Yeah.
And then the other two kinds of singing I do, I sing in a a cappella trio, um, old American folk songs, shape note, gospel, um, just kind of old American roots music. And then I sometimes sing shape note music in a community or group setting. Um, Groups that are often as small as a dozen or 15 people get together once a month, up to the statewide Vermont Sing, which usually has well over 100 people, and it's really something to be in a setting like that where you're one of 100 voices, and many
Right.
of them are really good singers, and they've been singing shape note music for decades. So it's quite a, it sends chills up and down your spine at
Yes.
times.
Yeah, I mean, as singing has always been a major part of my life from a child up, and there is that story of that hospice choir. I was not aware that something like that existed, and as you were telling that story, I that has to be extremely rewarding, but also just emotion. As you said, you have to keep your emotions in check, but my gosh, that has to be so difficult, as someone is passing, and then, but like you said, the human voice is so powerful, especially when singing with other voices. I was just trying to put myself in what that must be like. And I can't. I mean, I can imagine, but of course, never, till I could ever get the chance to experience something like that. I just find it fascinating. It's I'm so glad that there are groups out there like what you were a part of that even do something like that. I was completely unaware that anything like that existed. Wow.
Well, the people who I sing with, I really value them as friends, and they tend to be very giving people, and very I don't know, what's the word? Humane folks. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's just a really been a wonderful part of my life, and I would hate to give it up. And the one
Yeah.
thing I will say is that I wish there were more men who did it, because
Huh.
I end up singing bass, which is no problem. I have a bass range as well. Um, but at the moment, out of 23 people in our group, there are only two men to sing bass. And so it makes it more difficult, to put a sing together.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it's a real time. You know, you have to make a commitment to sing. And so sometimes our groups actually go out without a bass, so you have upper voices, and that's
Yeah.
very successful too. There are certain
Sure.
songs that don't require a bass, but we have all kinds of songs, everything from like almost show tunes, Beatles songs, um, gospel for sure, Appalachian, absolutely. We have some beautiful Appalachian songs that we do, Russian, uh, Jewish tradition. Just we try to be able to sing for a whole lot of different people, and we try to find out about those
Right.
people. What kind of music does it really, do they love? And
Yeah.
so
That's
yeah,
great.
it's a great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, Charles, we close every conversation and every episode out with 10 quick questions that I ask all of my guests, and these aren't deep questions. It's just get to know the person in 10 quick questions. So are you ready for your 10 quick questions?
Oh gosh,
No
I guess I
worries. It's easy.
I guess I'd better be, huh?
Yeah, here we go. Question
No
number one. And I
curveballs,
think
Doug.
no curveballs. I promise you. And I think we already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask the question because I always do. Number one, what is your morning drink of choice?
My morning drink of choice is Vermont Coffee Company dark roast coffee, straight up, no cream, no sugar, no
I've
maple
had,
syrup.
yeah, okay. I've had Vermont Coffee Company before, and it is good stuff. You're right. You're right. All right. Question number two: who is a go-to musical artist or group of yours?
Oh, my
And that's
goodness.
always a tough question. I know.
Um, I love the Staples singers,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
gospel,
Yeah.
from the 70s.
Yes.
Gillian Welch is somebody who I listen to almost
Yeah.
constantly in the car.
Both are great answers right there. That's for sure. Number three: what is a movie that you can watch over and over again and it never gets old?
Oh gosh, I don't watch many movies. Let me think
Okay.
about this. Let me think. Let me
Yeah.
think. Ah, my brother, one of my brothers would immediately give you five, but I can't give you any right now.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. That's
I'm
fine.
striking out on that one.
That's okay. That's okay. This one's gonna be, well, I'm curious to see. Number four: what is the last thing that you read?
Oh, the last thing that I read, I'm in the process of reading a novel called The Brass Verdict by Michael Connolly. Michael Connolly, I think, is one of the very best mystery writers in the world, and I like his stuff a lot. So I'm
Okay.
not quite done with it, but I guess you could say it's the current one I'm reading.
Okay. Sounds good. I think I know the question. I know the answer to this one, but number six: do you prefer laying on the beach or going for a hike?
Definitely not lying supine on the beach under the pitiless sun. I would rather go for a hike.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, number seven: you have invited me over for dinner. What are you cooking?
Hmm. Well, when I lived in Pennsylvania, it would have been venison tenderloin.
Ooh, and I
But
would have been there with bells.
Up here in Vermont, the deer are a wee bit fewer and farther between. So let's see, up here, what would it be? I might give you some chili,
Okay,
a pot of
yeah,
chili
that
with
sounds good.
cornbread on
That's
the side.
Oh, of course. Sounds good. Sounds good. Number eight: what is a dream vacation destination of yours?
Ah, Iceland.
Oh,
My
uh, uh,
My wife she's been to Iceland 25 times.
Wow.
I have been to Iceland probably a dozen times. And we have Icelandic horses. So a dream vacation for me would be to go to this farm that Nancy leads tours out of in Iceland. And it's also a horse breeding, training, and a farm where lessons can be given. And there's a tremendous instructor named Gudmar Peterson. And so my dream vacation is to spend a week there taking riding lessons from Gudmar.
That would be. I've been to Iceland as well, and I often tell people you have to go. I mean, it's one of those destinations that most people be like, really? Yeah, I mean, you've talked to enough people too, but having been there, and I would love to go back. My wife has. I was there before I married my wife, but I'd definitely like to take her, and I'd love to take my kids there. It's really, as cliche as it sounds, it is a magical place.
Well,
It's truly
if you
unbelievable.
if you go tomorrow, you can go see a volcano erupting.
Yeah, okay. I don't think
They
I'll
got,
be going tomorrow, but
they got one going right now. They're calling it a
sounds
tourist eruption. It's
oh,
not
okay.
dangerous.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, number 9. What is something that you are afraid of?
Mm, not being able to have an actual publisher for my Gideon Stoltz mysteries,
Okay, sounds
having to
good.
self-publish them. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, okay, okay. And the last question, what job other than one that you've either currently have or have had in the past would you love to have?
The job that I have right now,
That's great.
writing historical mysteries.
It's awesome when you can do something that you love, and it doesn't seem like work.
You
I
know,
always
I
think,
wouldn't I wouldn't change anything in my life right now. I just feel very fortunate to be able to write the kind of stuff I want to write and to live in a place that I really love and to have animals to be with, and especially during this last year when it's been so difficult to get together with friends, um, and so challenging. But no, I'm I feel very blessed to be where I am right now in my life.
well, I'm so happy that you are in a place like that. I think so many humans strive for that. It sounds like what you've achieved, and it speaks a lot towards the work that you've done over the years to get yourself to the position that you're in. So, I mean, that's great. I'm really happy for you, Charles. And as listeners, I will have in the show notes a link to Charles's website, where you'll be able to read more about his publications, and where you can purchase his books. And I cannot recommend enough the series that we talked about today in this episode, the Gideon Stoltz series, Stranger Here Below, and the brand new book that just came out, A Nighthawk's Wing. So we'll have links to that. You can please check that out in the show notes. And Charles, I just want to thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this journey that you're on, as albeit this is the very small part that I'm getting to play. But I'm very proud to be able to play that part in this process that you're going through in these novels. And I'm just so glad that you agreed to come up on the front porch today and sit and talk a little bit with me. And I just best of luck in the future. And I look forward to future novels to come out, and I'll be reading them as voraciously as I read the last one for sure. Thank you so much, Charles, for coming on the show today.
Doug, it's been a real blast. I've had a great time, and the next time I'm in Center County, let's do a recast of that beer somewhere in a local pub and get all caught up again.
You got it, buddy. You got it. Sounds good. All right. Thank you, Charles. Take care.
Okay, you too.
Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. 5 stars only, please. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. Also, please feel free to tell all of your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on my front porch.